who do you think is the most misunderstood villain?
Low-key Vecna.
Really?
Because, like...
No, shut up.
Oh.
That's it.
Maybe Vecna just wanted some friends. So here's my take on why I think the cave and his experience with the spy and the glowing lava rock thing was his most traumatic memory. It's kind of crazy to compare Aria to Vecna, but I mean, that was kind of like the first thing that came into my mind. Henry Creel, aka One, aka Vecna, aka Mr. What's-It, has one of the most unsatisfying character arcs that I've seen in the whole Stranger Things storyline. I feel like for 5 seasons straight, they're building up to this super complex and interesting storyline for a villain, and even make some interesting parallels to Will and how they're similar in the ways that they were taken advantage of from a very young age. But then the whole character arc just really falls flat by the end of the season and series, and I was left feeling disappointed and wanting to know more about this character. Hi everyone, I'm Jacqueline. I'm a marriage and family therapist, and today I'm going to be talking about Vecna's character through the lens of trauma and psychology, and hopefully break down his character in a more nuanced way. And maybe at the end of this, we can come to a conclusion together on whether or not we think that Vecna was actually a villain or victim. So the whole storyline of Vecna's character is a little bit confusing because it's kind of told out of order from seasons 4 and 5. So I'm going to do my best to speed run through everything about Vecna in chronological order. And if you already know everything, feel free to just skip ahead and get to the whole psychology breakdown part. Henry Creel is born sometime in the 1940s, and at an early age, his parents described him to be sensitive, and his teachers and doctors felt that there was something broken about him. We don't know exactly what behaviors led them to feel this way about him, but we do later on find out that it was around this time when Henry discovered the cave where the spy was hiding, and where he was then shot and absorbed the powers that led him to becoming Vecna. So, flash forward to 1959, his mom inherits some money from her great uncle, which then leads them to move to Hawkins, Indiana to hopefully get a fresh start from everything. So that officially brings us to Stranger Things: The First Shadow, and this is the play about Henry and his life in high school. And I've never watched this play myself because I don't live in New York or London or have the funds to do so. But based on my brief research, apparently this is where we really get to see the internal struggle with the evil that's infiltrated him. So for me, I'm expecting that they're gonna bring this kind of like storyline to the heart of season 5. So tell me why they literally do nothing with this in season 5. Like, it's literally not until they have the final battle where Will has this 2-minute dialogue with Henry, and he's like, "You've been a victim all along, just like me, and you should fight this evil that's inside of you." And then Vecna's just like, "Nah, bro." Like, that's literally how the conversation goes. And don't get me wrong, I loved that conversation between Will and Henry. I just wish that they had expanded upon it and made it more than 2 minutes. I think that would have added so much value to the character and the heart of what the show is about. During this time, he discovers some Black Widows in his new home and develops a special bond with the spiders and feels that he relates to them as being misunderstood yet superior beings. Henry sees the brokenness in the world around him and takes it upon himself to cleanse the world, starting with his family members. He starts to haunt them with nightmares and hallucinations to make them face who they are and the brokenness that's inside them. He starts with his mom, breaking her bones and gouging her eyes out before moving on to his little sister. And before he can finish off killing his dad, he passes out and is taken in by none other than Dr. Brenner, who fakes his death. So during this time, Dr. Brenner is obsessed with his sick experiments and replicating Henry's powers in other children. And this is mainly due to the fact that Dr. Brenner realizes that Henry is way too powerful and dark for him to be able to control and manipulate the way that he wants him to. So that's what ultimately makes Henry subject number 1, and he starts experimenting on all these other kids. And with that, Dr. Brenner puts in a little chip in Henry's neck to basically suppress the powers that he has. However, he decides to keep Henry as a janitor in Hawkins' lab, forcing him to suppress his powers for about 2 decades of his life. And after all the suppression, humiliation, and torture, Henry decides that it's time to break out of the prison through the help of Eleven. And if I know anything, it's that you probably shouldn't manipulate and imprison a disturbed and all-powerful child, because he then manipulates Elle's fears as an outcast and leads her to believe that all the other kids are planning on killing her. After 11 helps him take out the chip, he releases 20 years of rage on everyone in Hawkins' lab, including all the children. He's more powerful than he's ever been, and he thinks that 11 is going to join him, but when he realizes that she's horrified at what he's done and hates him for it, he tries to kill her too. So then we get this really epic battle scene between 11 and Henry, where they're both channeling all of their rage, their sadness, and trauma in order to fuel their powers to defeat each other. And of course, in the beginning, Henry starts to win because he's been suppressing his powers and anger for 20 plus years. But then 11 remembers a really happy and special memory that she has with her mom. And that's when Elle is finally able to overtake Henry and sends him into a whole different dimension, which we now know is Dimension X, but at the time she just thought he fizzled out into the middle of nowhere. In Dimension X, this is where Henry officially loses his human form and becomes the scaly, veiny, burnt Vecna that we know him to be. From Henry's telling of the story, he believes that he was the one that created the Mindflayer all along, but we can actually see that from the very beginning, the Mindflayer had been orchestrating all of his actions and decisions from that very moment that glowing lava rock thing infiltrated his mind. Okay, so now that we're all caught up, we can finally take a deeper dive into the psychology of Vecna's mind. If there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that season 5 was a hot mess. But the one thing that I found to be the most interesting mystery was why the cave was Vecna's greatest fear. I mean, even more so than killing multiple people in Hawkins in a super gruesome way, and even more so than killing his own mom and sister in that very same way, and then everything being pinned on his dad. I mean, if it were up to me, and this is just me, I would probably say that killing my own mom and sister is probably more traumatic than having a glowing lava rock thing infiltrate me. And this is where I feel like the Duffer Brothers missed such a great opportunity to explore something much deeper about Vecna's character. And if there's one thing that the Duffer Brothers do really, really well, is explore how trauma affects both children and adults alike. Vecna's storyline is no exception, but I feel like they had planned out and built up his entire character for 5 seasons, and then somehow they had amnesia or like lost their notes on what they wanted to do with that, and just kind of like left it hanging. I don't know. So here's my take on why I think the cave and his experience with the spy and the glowing lava rock thing was his most traumatic memory. It's never exactly specified the very, very beginning of when Henry started to show weird behaviors or act different from other people, but I like to imagine that it was before the whole cave situation happened. And we don't know exactly what those behaviors were, but I mean, hey, it's the 1950s, so it probably meant that he was either queer or had mental health struggles. I don't know. So to expand a little bit more on why the cave scene was so traumatic for Henry, I think that once the Mindflayer infiltrated him, that only deepened his sense of shame and alienation. He was already starting to feel different or weird and just separate from other people. But then on top of that, how many of us can say that we've killed someone and then been infiltrated by some dark spider force thing? And this is where I think the self-fulfilling prophecy starts to come into play. And I covered this in a little bit more depth in a very similar show called The Summer I Turned Pretty in one of my other videos. So if you want a little bit more of an explanation, you can take a look at that. I think this memory represents Henry's loss of innocence during his childhood, which was why it was so traumatizing for him, and how people who often experience trauma often block out those memories. Similar to Vecna, people are often afraid of confronting their trauma, as it can often lead them to feeling like they are reliving that moment all over again. Even when confronted with the concrete memory that shows that the Mindflayer was using him all along, he isn't able to face this head on because he doesn't know who he is without it. And he even goes as far as to say that neither of them are controlling each other because they're the same unit. I actually see this happen a lot in the beginning of therapy with clients who are severely depressed or anxious or have some sort of severe mental health struggles, where they might resist change a little bit or be hesitant to change some of these maladaptive behaviors they engage in. I know it can be weird to say that people don't want to be rid of this thing that has been plaguing them for so long, but it can almost be scarier for people to work towards change and healing because they're not sure what's on the other end of that. They've almost attached anxiety and depression to a part of their identity in some ways. They've likely only known a life where they've struggled a lot or utilized certain coping mechanisms to survive. And this is definitely not a conscious mechanism by any means where they resist change. It's definitely something that is unintentional most of the time. One of my favorite therapy quotes of all time is that we often choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar haven. And this really speaks to how difficult and uncomfortable change can be, even if that means there's so much more healing and joy on the other end of that. I think Vecna and the Mindflayer's relationship kind of parallels what grooming looks like in abusive relationships, where children don't really have the autonomy or ability to give consent, but they are slowly manipulated by a trusted adult that they have in their life and slowly start to think that the things that these adults are putting into their minds are thoughts of their own. Even as they grow into adults and are maybe even separated from their abusers, they have a hard time understanding what it is they actually want apart from what their abusers want because of how deeply ingrained that relationship is in their mind. It kind of reminds me of how Aria and Ezra start their relationship when she's really young and in high school, and even after they I think they break up and make up multiple times, she decides to continue pursuing a relationship with him even into adulthood. It's kind of crazy to compare Aria to Vecna, but I mean that was kind of like the first thing that came into my mind. People identify that Vecna often targets people with trauma or a dark past, but I actually think that it goes much deeper than that. I think he specifically targets people who experience shame and don't have a community around them to support them. Trauma is not just defined by a scary or horrible situation that we go through, but also the way that it reshapes our narratives about ourselves or about other people. For example, I'm not worthy, I'm not loved, the world isn't safe, people around me are not safe. It shifts one's worldview into one that is much more hypervigilant on the day-to-day. Arguably, the whole group has been through some pretty traumatic shit just in the sheer number of deaths that they witnessed in the past few years. But I think the way that Max goes through handling her emotions is really different from the way that the rest of the group handles their emotions. Max is targeted by Vecna because she doesn't allow herself to rely on others and often alienates herself from her loved ones. She doesn't open up to the school psychologist, and she continues to push Lucas away even though he knows something is wrong. Even when she admits she's literally being hunted by Vecna, she doesn't allow herself to show her emotions to her friends. She keeps her walls up in order to protect herself, but her walls are ultimately what leads her to being vulnerable to Vecna's attack. I think the real reason that he chose people like Chrissy and Max was not just because he was looking for someone easy to target and that was vulnerable, but I wonder if maybe he was even looking for someone that he relates to or that could understand him on some level. Maybe Vecna just wanted some friends. Vecna literally hates and despises everyone that he kills, his family, the people in Hawkins, and he's described them to be these broken and ashamed people, which ironically is all the ways that he was described by people around him growing up. And so to answer the question of whether or not Vecna was a villain or a victim, I don't think there's a very straightforward answer to that. I think that Vecna is still responsible for all the murders and pain that he's inflicted on Hawkins, but not because he was an inherently evil child. In therapy, I try to encourage clients to understand that it's not their fault for the way that things are, or for certain defense mechanisms or coping mechanisms that they have, but it is their responsibility to heal the parts of them that might feel the need to defend and that are ultimately not serving them a helpful or positive purpose anymore. There's this concept in therapy called circular causality, and this is the idea that things continue to shape each other in a more cyclical way, instead of this more linear A to B to C kind of way that our brains really like to think about. Henry was originally influenced by the Mindflayer, but he also chose to let the Mindflayer have the power that it needed. The spy cautions him in the cave to resist the Mindflayer and its dark powers, but he chose to let it envelop him and grow instead. On the other hand, Will's relationship with his family and friends allows him to shift his narratives about himself. In the beginning, he felt like he was different, not lovable, not important, and through the relationships that he has with his friends, he believes that he is worthy, so much so to the point that they will battle literal demon demogorgons to save his life. Again, these are all the things that I wish the Duffer Brothers had focused on a little bit more in season 5, because why create such a complex character for Vecna when at the end of the day they were just going to make him this one-note evil villain? And don't get me wrong, I don't think that they should have given him a redemption arc, because I just don't think that that would have made sense for the storyline. But I would have liked to see them play a little bit more with this idea of manipulation versus autonomy, and the way that Will and Henry ended up being so different from each other. But the way that the Duffer Brothers handled Vecna's character is honestly the least of my complaints about season 5. So I just wanted to create a video on this anyways, because I had so many thoughts about it and wanted so much more from them. Anyways, you should let me know in the comments whether or not you think that Vecna is a villain, victim, or whether or not that answer is more nuanced.